Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending our Sage 300 CRE Payroll and Year-End Processing class webinar/webinar. As a tip, if you have any questions, click on the Q&A on the top toolbar to note your question. Questions will be reviewed and discussed at the end of the session. Unanswered questions will be posted on the Sage Community Hub. So we're going to go, here's the contents for this class: introductions, year-end center, reconciling payroll to itself, forms preparation, perform Aatrix forms review/test, and prepare for the 2025 year. Your instructor is myself, I'm Gayleen. Moderator is Shar. I want to remind you to go out to that year-end center on the Community Hub. You're going to find great resources, troubleshooting tips, links to knowledge-based checklists, and there's also some great external resources that we've tied into that Community Hub as well. So reconciling payroll. We want to reconcile payroll master file transactions to the totals. We want to make sure everything is in balance. We also want to reconcile our 941 reports. When we're reconciling payroll, we want to use that deposit summary report found under Reports, Pay Period Processing, Deposit Summary. This is a great report that can be used to reconcile to your subject to employee, subject to employer reports, Aatrix Federal 941 reports. We want to reconcile to all 4 quarters. The Aatrix Federal W2 report, which is what you get when you go in and generate your W2s. The Aatrix Federal Form 940 and the Aatrix State Quarterly reports. When running this report, pay attention and use those check dates. Do not use period end dates, as checks are updated to the master file and all government reports are using check dates. Some helpful tips when it comes to potential out of balance causes: data manipulation. In other words, were totals changed on an employee setup record? Did we have a voided check from a prior year or prior quarter? Did we have any refunds of pre-tax deductions which would cause missing or inaccurate taxable and subject to amounts? Could we have moved an employee to a different master file or data folder? And was the close month task ran incorrectly? In other words, not run under task close month, but were the payroll settings manipulated or changed? Did we close the payroll year before the last checks were posted for our reporting year? Did we move any checks to a history file? Or did we have any checks not posted from the new file? When we run the deposit summary, we want to run it on the current file because this is representing posted checks, okay? Those are the ones we're interested in. There can be many causes of an out of balance in payroll, but it's very important to resolve these issues prior to running your final reports. Okay, forms preparation. Are your forms set up to report accurate information, specifically W2 form and the payroll settings? We also want to make sure that you are on the most current version of the software. This year's supported year-end version is 24.3. This is available in our download center, and you will need to log in to access that information. I've inserted or added the knowledge base article for you. Okay, so forms preparation. We want to modify the W2 form if we need to report certain pieces of information that appears in box 12 and box 14. Okay, it is, as in years past, it is not necessary to create a new form every year. You really only need one, unless you are also including formulas on your form that are looking up a prior year or perhaps maybe a current year. Then you could have a form called W2 format prior year and W2 format current year. For Aatrix, it retrieves the information from the current PRT. Well, I would say most of the information, because the deductions, health insurance, 401k, those types of information, if you're using formulas, will come from the master file, okay? Things that you want to make sure are on your form before you begin: is your 401k on that form? Is your Roth health insurance, officer's health insurance, company car, any miscellaneous item, do they appear on your form? If not, you want to make sure it's set up. If you're unsure of what should be added to box 12 or box 14, there's a great resource for you under the help topics. Click on index and type in box 12. This information corresponds to the Circular E. So you'll see about Form W2s, for example, on this screenshot. This topic is very large, and we'll also go through all other codes, and you can select the code that most identifies with your item that you're reporting. Okay, in order to modify those forms, you're going to go into Tools, Modify Forms, W2 Forms. Okay, if you're unsure about what should be reported, there is a great article out there produced by the IRS that will tell you your 2024 general instructions, and the link is right here as well. Now, you'll notice something new on this form. Alabama instituted a new change where anybody who was an hourly employee and they worked more than 40 hours in a week, their overtime pays were exempt for the whole year of 2024 and half of the year for 2025. So if you are in that state, you're going to want to make sure that you include this information on your W-2 format. The knowledge base article for modifying a W-2 format is included on this slide, and the article that talks about combining more than one tax pay deduction or fringe into a single box on a W-2 or T4 is listed on this knowledge base article. Forms prep. The other thing that we want to make sure, if you have a retirement plan, 401k, pension, anything like that that could classify as a retirement plan, on your employee setup record on the miscellaneous info, be sure to mark retirement plan. Very important. The other important checkbox is third-party sick pay. Now, not every employee will have third-party sick pay, but be aware that those that do, you want to make that box. You want to check it. Very important. Now, forms prep when it comes to the ACA. The payroll settings contain default information for the Affordable Care Act forms. These settings are the settings that would be used for most of your employees. Okay. For more information about what code should appear for the coverage code, the safe harbor code, and other ACA, in other words, origin of policy and plan start month, make sure you go into the IRS instructions for Form 1095. Your tax advisor may also understand or know which codes you should put in here. Each code means something completely different. If to delve into that a little bit more, the default coverage code, we want the code representing the type of healthcare coverage your company usually offers full-time employees. Okay. The default plan share costs, this is not the premium that the employee pays. This is the lowest plan premium offered to an employee for self-coverage. It wants the lowest cost plan. Okay. Default safe harbor code. This is the code that, based upon your employment status or enrollment status, that applies to most of your employees. The default origin of policy. If your company generated the 1095B for any employee instead of a 1095C, select that origin of policy code that applies to most of your employees. The default plan start month. This is the calendar month that your company offers health insurance plan. In other words, if Sage begins January 1, we're going to put January. It's not the individual month where an employee elected to participate in that coverage or became qualified for that coverage. In other words, if they were hired in March, it's March. No, this pertains to your company. When it comes to these settings, think of majority rules. Okay, individual settings can be entered either off the employee ACH coverage record, that would be current year information, okay, or on the task's ACA compliance. From the task ACA compliance, you can enter prior year information. Okay, remember that the individual employee information is maintained by you. If your employee did not work the entire year, you'll make changes on that task ACA compliance grid or the employee ACH coverage record. But remember, the employee ACH coverage record, current year only. All right. When we think about payroll and end of year, we want to think about the size of your files. Do you actively archive employees or do you move checks? Archiving is a good thing. It reduces the size of the current file, speeds up reporting and payroll. You want to keep at least 2 years of checks in the current PRT. You never want to move a check for somebody who will be receiving a W2 form. If you move those checks out, you'll have inaccurate totals. Okay, that's because Aatrix only uses the current file, not the history. Always make a complete backup of the checks. Okay, and this is moving checks from current to history. There's a knowledge base article that has great instructions on how to do that. Archiving terminated employees speeds up your reporting and maintenance of the employee records. You're not going to move any employee out of that data folder who should be reported on a W-2. So employees who did not work in the current reporting year, you'll want to verify what that ACA exempt status is. Otherwise, when you run that ACA forms in Aatrix, they'll be included on your report. The only way to get them off is a deselect. So prepare for the year end. You can go to an inquiry and add a column called ACA exempt. Make sure that those employees who did not work for you in your reporting year have a status of not working. Okay. When it comes to archiving your employees, always make a backup before you archive. There's a couple of KBs on here which are great resources for you, so you'll want to make note of those as well. Now, we're going to go into the test drive and review of the Aatrix forms. I always recommend a test drive. It's hard to get used to doing something when you only do it once a year. So this is going to be a great way to remember those steps, or if you've never done it before, become familiar with those steps. Okay. When you begin, you want to make sure that your Aatrix software is up to date and you run all updates when prompted. This is a normal process, does need to be completed. If your software is not up to date, you may run into some odd issues. One of them could be that your forms are watermarked with draft copy, do not file. Your forms might have incorrect and old dates on them. In other words, 2017, 2016, 2020. If you see those old dates on the forms list, you know you're not up to date. The other thing that can cause Aatrix forms to not, the prepare not to work is if you already have a report open that you've not closed out of them. Okay, the forms preparer cannot update your forms if it thinks there is a file in use. Okay, update that Aatrix software before you continue with your test drive. Remember that it's not necessary to run the update on a server. It can be run on a workstation. If you're having an issue running the Aatrix updates, let your IT professional know. You can also download the latest update manually, and it's very easy to do. Okay, and there's a knowledge base article that discusses that as well. So to start our process, we're going to go to Task, Federal e-file and Reporting, and we're going to go ahead and open up, say a W-2. This prompt message is going to come up immediately letting you know you've got an update that needs to be applied. You have a choice of saying no and hitting continued expired, but you'll be prompted several times throughout the course of your report to upgrade. So let it go ahead and upgrade automatically. If it cannot upgrade automatically, we can download the update, right-click on it, and run it as administrator. The update process is going to provide you details showing you're in progress and which forms might be updated. It's not unusual at this time of year to see quite a few updates within a month or even in a week. You'll be notified once the update is completed. You're going to go back into Task, Federal e-file and Reporting, or Task, State e-file and Reporting, and select the report you were going to run before you got the update message. Okay, before we begin our update, we're going to want to print that deposit summary. Remember to run this report from the current transaction file and include the first day of the year to the last day of the year. Think of wrapping your arms around all these transactions. So for W-2 reporting, you're going to use the employee tax section of the report. Those are those columns to the left of the report. For 941 reporting, you're going to use the federal taxes. both employee and employer paid. So that's that first section of the report, the top section. For 940 reporting, you're going to use the employer unemployment taxes. Okay. For state quarterly reporting, you'll use both employee and employer state taxes. You can't tell from the screenshot, but the deposit summary also would include local taxes, and those would appear underneath the state taxes. The Aatrix year-end release will update the report year, so you don't need to wait for that update change in the year. You may find that the changes are already there. I tested this morning and my changes were already at 2024. Okay. Always make sure to take it into a test mode. Now, a couple times I'll say this over and over again, test mode will not save your changes and it will not update your master file or transaction record. Okay. So once we go in here, you're going to highlight your form. You'll get a description of what it is and you can select the year. So when we get to the W2, W3 employees to process, you're going to see a list of all employees. Only those employees with earnings in the reporting year will show on the Aatrix Prepare Grid. It is not necessary to deselect anybody. Okay. And again, most of the totals here are being retrieved from your current file. The W2 setup wizard. For your first run, use test. You may even want to use test more than once. Perfectly fine. Okay, this gives you an opportunity to check for errors and or issues and also familiarize yourself with this entire process. I like to use all employees because that deposit summary is on my entire payroll. I'm not running it on only the first 25. The company setup wizard. Aatrix will take you through the company setup wizard where you'll be prompted to verify information about the company, taxes, and options for your report. This is normal, okay? So you're going to confirm this information that's listed, but remember, these changes are not going to get saved because we're in test mode. So you'll make the required prompts and select what best fits for you. If you notice that the company information is wrong, wait to change it when you go through the final W2 run. Test mode won't save anything. State and local tax items. Okay, this page may or may not display warnings and or errors regarding your company setup. Corrections are very easy to make from this change. And in our test mode, if you are prompted that you need to make changes, you will need to make those changes in order to continue in our testing. Okay, so test mode is not going to save it, but be aware that you will need to make changes in order to move on through the forms process. Now, you'll also get a message regarding state and or local items that might be ignored. Aatrix likes to alert you so that when you are going through your forms process, you're not alarmed if you don't see something show up, a specific form. So don't worry about this, but this is just for your information only, so you're aware. So you can see, for an example, we've got one for Washington and we've got one for Oregon. You may see them for other states as well. This is normal. Okay, special state and or local tax items. Okay, so again, when you get into this process, this form, it will tell you I'm ignoring this local item. Maybe it has no reporting requirement. The state does not need to see this information. So this is normal, and you can click OK to this and hit the next. For those of us who are working in or have employees in the state of Pennsylvania, you'll be asked to clarify certain pieces of information regarding those local taxes. Again, this is normal. Okay, data verification and W3 information. Very important, both of these boxes when you get to this spot. If you have any employees who are exempt from any part of Medicare or Social Security, think of those F1 student visas, folks that are in the country, perhaps on a student visa, working for you, maybe apprenticeships, things like that. This is not going to be for U.S. citizens typically, okay? So if we have anybody who is exempt, we'll need to make that box. Mark that yes, okay? Do we have anybody who's a member of clergy, control numbers, or anybody who elects to receive W2 forms electronically? Make those selections, Okay. Control numbers, not everybody uses control numbers. Okay. Most of us are 941 payers. So if you are a 941 payer, you'll need to select that box. If you have third-party sick pay, you'll also need to select this box. Okay, very important. Now, you get a choice on how you want the Social Security numbers displayed on your employee copies. So right here, you get the opportunity to truncate with X's, asterisks, or no truncation. As you go through this, you'll see prompts that will remind you you're in test mode. Okay, this is awesome. This is a great reminder. All righty. Now, preparing employee detail prompt message. I like this message. You do have a choice to tell it not to show it to you again, but I don't mind it. It gives me just an idea of what's going on, what it's doing, and what I'm going to go through as I go through these steps. You notice this prepare grid. Anything in the aqua color blue can be changed. Okay. Pay attention to those totals at the top. They're very important. Okay, so as we look at those boxes, I'm going to go back here. You can see box 1, federal withholding taxable. Box 2, federal withholding tax. On your deposit summary, it's going to show as contribution. Box 3, Social Security subject to. This amount will be less than, say, Medicare because of those limits, employees who may have met that limit. Box 4, Social Security tax. Box 5, Medicare subject to. Box 6 is your Medicare tax plus med additional. So I've outlined them here. Remember that anything that where we see the amount is actually contribution on the deposit summary. If you're a multi-state employer, you may see several columns for box 16 and box 17. This is the taxable for that specific state and the tax. Okay, some state taxes will also print in boxes 14, 18, and 19. Local taxes typically appear in 18 and 19, and that would be the taxable and the tax. Okay, if you have items in boxes 12 and 14, meaning those 401k, those health insurances, things that we modified on the W-2 form, make sure you know what that total should be here because you can validate that during our test mode. If you notice that the amount is not correct, it might mean that we need to modify that form and add something that might be missed. Okay, so this is where your deposit summary comes in handy because you can take this report and you can validate the totals to each of these columns as they appear. It's a good way to test and make sure you are in balance. Once you've verified your totals, you're going to click on next step. Aatrix is going to go out and verify other information that you have on that prepare grid. Very common error is box 13 retirement. If we have a 401k on our W-2, or we have a Roth, an IRA, whatever we have, that checkbox for retirement plan must be selected. Now, even in test mode, you must select that box to continue with the remaining steps. Okay, so make sure that you continue and mark that box, and also make note of those employees who do not have that box checked. You can click the print list and get a nice list so that later on, after we're out of test mode, you can go back in there and correct those employees. Changes that you make here is not going to go back and write to your data. It never will. Aatrix will not write back to your data. It retrieves the information, okay? All right, so not only are box 13 items verified, but your FICA amounts are verified, and they're verified with a calculation. So it's going to take the Social Security wages, multiply it by the rate, and it's going to see if box 4 matches that dollar amount. You cannot be off more than $1. Okay, so you want to make sure that this is correct. And if in fact you have anybody who is not correct, make note of them so we can go back and look at those and fix those before you start your actual W-2 run. Okay, now box 6 is going to include not only the Medicare taxes, but the med additional tax. Okay, so it's something to be aware of. Your box 5 amount will not change, box 6 amount can be different. Okay, so this is a page that's displayed. You can choose not to show it. I like it because it gives you, it'll tell you your final opportunity to review or edit employee detail for the upcoming reports. You can click double check to go back and it'll walk you through those errors that it found or warnings, or you can tell it agree and keep going. Remember, we're in test mode, so we can go ahead and hit agree and keep going. All right, so Aatrix is going to give you some options when it comes to printing your W-2s. I do like this option. It's pretty economical, really, because the price of W-2 forms are pretty expensive these days, but you have options. You can pick what works for you. You can choose to buy a PDF archive of your W-2s, so you can hit yes, include. I always like to save a copy of my W-2s as a PDF anyways and put it into secure drive. So I like the fact that I can get to it from my Aatrix forms folder if I needed to go in and look at anything that I generated in the past. But I also like a copy that's on a secure drive that perhaps myself and maybe my controller can gain access to that. It's going to be something that's protected, not something that's available for everybody else. Okay. These right here are just the states that are listed that you want to file. If you click select all, and actually it should be select all, then you can keep going. Okay. Down here, if you hit print on the review data, all you get is a list of the reports that are going to be filed. It's not actually printing the forms. So you can go ahead and look at those copies. We're going to just hit that next button. Okay, so just to kind of get an idea, familiarize yourself with these forms so you're aware of what they look like. The employer W-2, this is for your copy, and you'll notice that it displays 4 different employees on one page. Okay, when you're printing your final reports, this is definitely a report that I would click save as a PDF and put it in a secure location. Your employer W-2, again, your copy, 2 different employees on one page. You can choose to go ahead and save this copy as a PDF for yourself. Okay. Aatrix will also save your final reports, but again, we're in test mode right now, so we're just kind of looking and verifying totals. This is your 941 Federal W-3. This report should balance to the 4 quarters of the 941s that you submitted on behalf of your company. So definitely this is one that you want to validate your totals against. Now, Aatrix will take you through several other state forms as well, and also the employee copy of the W-2. So you're going to have a variety of different forms. These are the forms that generally print when you're finishing up your W-2s. You're going to have state W-2s, you may have local W-2s, you may have withholding reconciliation forms. These are all good reports to save so you can go back and review. Now, you also get the option to e-file and test drive. So it's where you can kind of go through the process so you become familiar with it. Remember that when you're in test drive, no actual payroll information will be transmitted because you are in test drive. It just walks you through the steps, but it's not a bad idea to get in there and become familiar with it. Again, it's hard to become familiar with something you only do once a year. Okay, now, just a forms review, the 940 report is typically available to you in January. Okay, it will be for the 2024 dates, and it will tell you what date it is for. So you'll be able to see exactly what it is. You'll look at the description. You know this is the 940. This is an annual report. Okay, the report dates that you see here will change when the year-end update is run for Aatrix. Your 941 report. This is your quarterly federal report, which is going to report your federal taxes with the exception of FUTA. So federal withholding, Med, Med-E, Med Additional, SOCH, and SOCI. Now your FICA amounts known as Med, Med-E, Med Additional, SOCH, and SOCI, they are going to do a calculation. They are going to take the subject to amounts based on your checks and multiply them by the specific rates. Federal withholding will report the federal withholding tax that was calculated off the check tax record and the taxable. Okay, so this is a good way to kind of spot check. Using that deposit summary, you can verify your totals. And again, I love running that deposit summary. You can run it by quarter. Always use the first date of the quarter to the last date of the quarter. All right, so forms review. How do I find a form that I've saved or maybe have in progress? I can go into File, or excuse me, Task, Federal e-File and Reporting, and I can click on Saved Reports. I'll make sure that my federal EIN number is correct. Some of you may have more than one EIN in different data folders. Make sure you select the right one. And this will tell you the status of those reports and what you have printed. You can go into any of these, highlight them, and click either View Print or go into Edit. And you can go back into that report. So if you left something in a in progress type of status, you can go back and access that report via this step. So it's a very nice way to get to those reports. All right, so linking Aatrix tax types, this is typically done for local taxes. And what you'll do when you open up the federal, either go to Task, Federal e-File Reporting, or Task, State e-File Reporting, you can click on this little button that will say Link Aatrix Tax Types. From there, if it's a new one, you're going to click the asterisk, give it a group ID, a description. Now the states will appear here as drop down. So you'll be able to select that state and you'll be able to select the tax description, what that is. You can enter your employer ID and you can put in or change the W-2 description. You would select these taxes and they'll pop over here to the left. Excuse me, the right, my other left. Anyway, so you can select here, pop them over there, or move them back and forth as you need to. So if you have locals, definitely do this step prior to running through your test. Okay, so your takeaways on your forms review: run your W-2s in test mode. Helps identify any potential errors, brings some familiarity to a task that you only do once a year. Remember that test mode will not save any changes. You can document any issues or you can run a report so you can make the corrections before completing the final reports. Do save your reports as a PDF, secure them in a location where only you have access to, or perhaps maybe your controller. Aatrix will always save your reports and you can access them, but I like that added security feature of just making sure that I have them saved someplace where I can get to them. Okay, so you can, those PDFs that you save, you can always provide them to your tax accountant, your CFO as needed, so they can go in there and validate those totals too. Preparing for the 2025 year. Alrighty, so we want to verify that payroll reconciles to itself, okay? Or let's say we verified payroll reconciles to itself. We've reviewed the Aatrix forms. What's next? Okay, we want to get ready for the new year. So things to think about when it comes to preparing for the 2025 year. Have we completed our final payroll for 2024? In other words, everything is done, okay? We don't have to, we believe we don't have to cut any more checks for 2024 and post them into 2024. If you use a third party for payment of sick or disability wages, it wouldn't hurt to reach out to them and ask them if they've paid any third party sick pay for your company, so you can get that information and that notice and record it into your software before you close the year. So much easier. Have we verified our state unemployment rate and limit for the new year? In other words, you'll usually have gotten something from their state. It's usually in December. If you haven't gotten it, reach out to the state, find out where it was sent, or even reach out to your controller, find out maybe it was sent to them. But you want to have this information because this is a tax that we don't update. We don't know what the experience rating may be for your company, so we don't know what that rate is. And that's something that you'll need to update. Now, before we close the year, you want to review the setup of your pays and your deductions. Do we need to retain any year-to-date totals when we close that year? There's a checkbox, and if that box is not checked, then that item will not be rolled over, okay? Retaining the year-to-date totals will ensure that whatever it might be, deduction or pay, paid in the current year will roll over to the new year. For payroll, you typically see this done on your accrual pays, your PTO, your sick, or your vacation. And you would allow it to roll over for the accruals. In other words, if we accrue so many units a week for our employees, and if, if when we go to pay them, if that is also an accrual pay that triggers something else, we want to make sure that that is rolling over. Okay. Some of those deductions are going to be things like loans, liens, or potential garnishments with limits. If we have a garnishment and we're using a limit, then we definitely want to roll over that item at close year. Okay. If we don't need to roll over anything, then just go through your pays and your deductions and make sure that the retained year-to-date totals at close year is not selected. Now, the other thing to consider, do you need to update any amounts? In other words, limits. Formulas for 401k could be a birth date. The IRS makes changes every year, so be aware. Do you have any health insurance deductions that have changed their amounts? Make sure those are in place prior to you processing that first check for 2025. It's a great idea to make a backup of the company data folder before you close your payroll year, store it in a secure location, and make sure you close your payroll year and download and update your taxes before you process your first payroll of the new year. Okay, so we've closed our year. We're ready to move on for 2025. Make sure, update your state employer paid unemployment and employee paid disability taxes. Verify that tax download is complete. A great way to verify, you can look at the tax release notes, which are available. You can also go in and check the new effective date. For federal withholding, you're going to see 1/1/2025. For Social Security taxes, you're going to see 1/1/2025. So any tax that will have changed, we also change the effective date. Okay. If you're in a state which has added new taxes, and there's a few of us that have, you're going to go to the state tax group and verify that the taxes on the state tax group are accurate. New state taxes are not automatically added to the groups, so you'll want to add them. Now you can also look at those tax release notes, and they'll be able to tell you which taxes were new this year and what was added. Couple things to note, if you've accidentally processed payroll prior to closing that year, you're going to reprocess those checks after you download the new taxes and close your year, because we want the subject to and taxable amounts for all taxes. Anything that has a limit, we want them to be accurate. Okay. If you've accidentally processed payroll prior to downloading the taxes, download your taxes and reprocess those checks. Okay. If you print your first checks of the new year, make sure you're aware of that check date. So many of us are used to entering in, a 2024 year. It becomes automatic. Your brain just does it automatically, right? So when it comes to printing those first checks of 2025, be aware of that. Make sure that check date is 2025. If we printed and we realize we used 2024, you can go back in and reprint those checks. Okay. Payroll's very generous with that. You don't have to void them if they're still in the new file. Just go back into task print checks, click the reprint box, put in that check date. Now, if we've accidentally printed and posted those 2025 checks with a 2024 date, make sure you void them using the correct check date and accounting date you used when those checks were printed. You can definitely retain them as new. That'll pull them back in the new file. Well, you'll process and print with the correct date. Okay, some things to be aware of. Aatrix updates its year-end filing deadlines, and there's a link on the Community Hub to this as well in case there's a change. But as of right now, this is where we are. Okay, now typically they will make 1 or 2 changes by the end of January. Could be that they'll expand things, but be aware of those dates, especially when it comes to W-2s. We don't want to be creating our W-2s on January 30th. We want to be ahead of the game. So make sure you're ready and ready to go. Don't wait till January 30th to do your W-2s. The other nice thing about Aatrix, when you prepare your forms, you can put in a date to where you want those W-2s sent to your employees. So it doesn't have to be the next day. You can make it a week out. If you're early and you're realizing maybe I want to build a week cushion in there for me, I could go in, generate my forms, send it to them, but give Aatrix a date of, say, January 15th. And then I know if something happens and I need to make a change, I can pull back those forms and not have them sent because I gave it a future date. So definitely some things to think about. Okay, so we're going to go through a nice little recap. We've talked about reconciling payroll to itself. Subject to reports, to the deposit summary, they should be within balance. There should not be any deviation or change. Okay, not even a penny. Okay, we talked about the forms preparation, going in, making sure our W-2 format was set up correctly, the employee record was marked as appropriate, and our payroll settings were set correctly. We went through an Aatrix forms review, kind of a test. This is a great way, you're going to print that deposit summary. You're going to compare it to what you see on the screen. This gives you confidence, you know that you're good to go. Remember, anything you do in test mode is not saved. So you're going to have to make sure you can print a report, make a note of it, correct whatever is showing up on there in test mode so that when you go into your final, you're ready to go. And we talked about preparing for the 2025 year. So you definitely want to make sure you reconcile. You're on the latest update of the software, you've downloaded the taxes, and you've closed your year. Okay, so here's some great links, really good tools for you. You want to make sure you review the year-end center on the Community Hub. You get lots of good information and resources. Bookmark the sage.com resources page. Okay, quick access to the KB, very nice and easy. Where can I find the latest release, tax update, product update, or version? Community Hub. Now remember, when you go into the download center, you're going to have to log in. Super easy. Okay. All righty, let's turn this over to Shar.
Hey, everybody. I just want to remind you that most of your questions will be answered in that year-end center that Gayleen showed us. And don't forget to check that out. I've posted links to it several times here. If you need your question answered quicker and we don't get to it today, there are other resources. You can post your question in the Community Hub at the Sage 300 CRE discussion page, and a super user or Sage expert will answer your question there. And if you still need help, you always can call in to support. We're happy to answer your calls. The slide deck and the video will be posted on our Community Hub, and I did post a link out to where in the Q&A area. So our first question for you, Gayleen, is we have somebody who is a multi-state employee. Is there a way to file all the state filings in Aatrix, and how does that affect W-2s in the box 18 and 19?
All right. So what's nice about the Aatrix and the W-2s, if you have a multi-state employer or if you are a multi-state employer, have a multi-state employee, they'll get multiple W-2s. So they'll get a W-2 that will include 2 states and 2 locals, and then they may get another one that was going to include 2 more states and 2 more locals. You could have somebody that conceivably could get 5 or 6 W-2 forms, and the only difference, the federal amounts will be the same on all those forms. The state values are going to be different. So each state on box, on those appropriate boxes, 16, 17, they're going to have that specific state ID and the taxable along with the tax. Same thing with the locals. So you're going to have all that information. And if there's more than 2 states, they'll just get a second or third or fourth W-2 form. So they'll all be generated, and Aatrix you can choose to have Aatrix send them out to the employee, or you can print them for the employee as well. So it's very nice. Great question.
Thanks, Gayleen. So I have another question for you. Do I have to e-file?
So the IRS puts limitations on those who can paper mail every year. I'm trying to remember, I thought it was down to like 10. Every year they increase it and change the rules. You'll want to definitely contact or go out to the IRS website. Last I remember, that used to be 100, and we're talking years ago. Now I think it's lower, like 10. In the 10.
It is.
So make sure you
10.
change. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's also 10 across all tax forms. So if you have 5 1099s and you have 6 W-2s, you have to e-file both your 1099s and your W-2s.
Yeah, it's pretty efficient. It really is. And don't forget you can choose to email the forms to the employees. If you put their email address in there, and you elect to e-file them, there's a slight discount in the cost of the filing. So it might be a motivator.
All right. So if I'm on version 23.2, will I need to upgrade to 24 before I can issue W-2s or start my 2025 payroll?
We do recommend that you upgrade as soon as you can because there have been changes, especially when it comes to AP. Okay, so we recommend you're on the latest year-end version. This version has been out since October, and it's available in the download center. So you do have to log in to get there, but it's quick and easy. And since you're already on a later version, it's not going to take long.
Perfect. And that seems to be it for our questions and answers. Let's give a couple minutes to see if anybody else has a question. Looking at, I'm trying to think of anything else. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Let me publish this and get to the question here. I changed my default ACA settings in payroll settings, but the default information in the ACA forms set up in the employee records is holding the old information that was the default before the change. How do I update so the new default information is used?
That's interesting. So the employee information that was entered on the employee is not correct. What do you see when you go into the task ACA compliance? I'd be curious to see, is it the new settings or is it the old default settings? You can change them. Now remember, the settings that are on the employee setup ACA exempt tab, those are only stored for the year. Okay. You can't get to that information if you close your year, they won't be used. Okay, so you definitely want to make sure that those settings are accurate, but I'm curious if you go into the task ACA compliance and bring up the employee and make sure you pick the right year on that, what do you see there? Okay, we want to make sure that they are accurate. And let's make sure you're on the most current version.
Okay, so we have a couple quick little questions here that the articles are in the knowledge base, the SAGE knowledge base. You can get out there easily by going to www.sagekb.com. And I have put links to all of them, or you can search them. We'll leave the Q&A up a little bit after so that you guys can go through and grab all of those links I did of the articles that were in the presentation, or most of them are linked out on the year-end center. And then the recording will be out on the community hub, and I will repost that location here for you. And let me get that really quick.
That's awesome. And remember, don't let this stuff beat you up. You can go through right now prior to the end of the year and run your deposit summary, comparing it to your subject to reports. They should be in balance to the penny, no differences. Okay. The subject twos are pulling off your master file records. Your deposit summary is transactional. Always use the first day of the reporting period on your deposit summary to the last day. Even if you know you didn't have a check date, say January 5th, use 1/1 to 12/31. Kind of think of wrapping your arms around all those transactions, and always use check date. Do not use period end date.
Here's some questions for you. We got a whole bunch that just came through. What if we did the tax update already? Does this need to be undone?
Yes, it does. You should not have downloaded and updated. Well, actually, let me tell you this. The 2025 tax update is not even available yet. So you might not have a problem. A way to check, go into Setup Taxes, Tax Rates, and bring in SOC, S-O-C. Should have this year's effective date and this year's limit. We plan on preparing and publishing when the next tax update is going to be ready for 2025. It's very soon. I can't give you dates, but it's very soon. And you'll want to make sure to go out there and you can download, don't update until you're ready for 2025. Okay. Because limits are going to change for Social Security. It does every year. Okay. And we don't want those limits to be applied toward any wage or check that's going to be issued in 2024. So check your dates. My guess is you haven't hurt anything because that update's not ready yet. Okay.
Okay, so for the Canadian payroll, are they able to make changes to T4 forms and add 16A for CPP?
They sure are. And remember, they shouldn't have to do anything as long as they're on the most current version. CPP and CPP2 is going to report on that form perfectly. Okay, we've already done a test on that. Just make sure you're on the 24.3 version.
Okay, I'm answering as many as I can.
Yes, I understand.
When retaining year-to-date totals, do these totals add the prior totals together, or is that done manually?
Great question. What it does, if I have, let's say I have a PTO accrual and I have 24 units in the year-to-date field for an employee. If that is marked as retained year-to-date totals at close year, when I close the year, that 24 units is now going to show up in the new year-to-date column. And if I've not accrued anything yet for PTO, you'll also see it in the prior year column for units. So retain year-to-date totals means it pulls over the year-to-date units and or year-to-date dollar amount into the new year. Okay, so that's why typically when it comes to a pay, it's going to be units, usually your units accrual that you're going to roll over because you're keeping track of what somebody's earned, and what they've taken. So you have a correct balance on their stub. If it is a deduction, and it's a deduction like a 401k, any deduction that can be reported on a W2 or a T4, you do not retain year-to-date totals on those items. Okay, the only items that are rolled over to the new year are those items which may have large limits, like a garnishment. It's not met in the current year, so you roll it over so that it can be tracked in the new year. Because on the employee record, you may have a limit and a limit period. Okay, so really watch what you are retaining, review them. Go into setup deductions, hit the next button, make sure the only items that are retained are those items where you have a limit that's going to exceed what's going on in this year. In other words, a tax garnishment, maybe a lien, that type of thing, or a loan. Maybe you've made a loan to the employee. That would be something that you would retain. But anything that could be reported on a T4 or W2, do not retain.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, good question on that one.
I heard from the previous employee that did the W-2s last year, so somebody who did the W-2s last year, that the insurance column needs to be added for the W-2s. Is that still true? Did we go over this?
Are we talking about box 12 code DD? We might be. This would be the employer sponsored healthcare, and it includes what the employer has contributed on your behalf and what you've contributed on your behalf. So that is something that is still reported. And since it's two things being added together, you have a formula that you're using. Okay, so evaluate that formula that's set up on your form and make sure that if you're going to run your W-2s off of next year, that the formula is referencing prior year. If you're going to run your W-2s off of this year, the formula is referencing year to date. And we also have a great KB on that as well.
And we'll get that for you guys in the Q&A document when we get that published, which will hopefully be sometime this week.
Yes.
We have a question, two questions. Is there a KB on the correct way to archive year 2024 and generate a new company file for 2025? I'm not quite sure about
I'm
that
yeah.
question.
So typically, I'm wondering for clarification, are they saying they close this and start a new data folder? Because that's not usually what we see, but I'm not sure if that's what your workflow is. Typically, you can always make a backup before you close the year and just have it in a safekeeping someplace else. But when it comes to payroll, you'll close your year. Anything in this year to date buckets will go into the prior year. And that's important because you may have other reports, maybe queries that you're using that is looking at or combining prior year plus year to date. So typically I don't see anybody that's going through and completely starting a new company data folder for the new year. I do see people who make a backup and then they can always restore that backup if they need to, keep it in a safekeeping, maybe they restore that so they can look at something in kind of like a snapshot in time, to see what was out there. But typically you wouldn't archive because you might need the year-to-date information. You wouldn't completely set up a new data folder for the new year. Is that what we're talking about?
We haven't had any updates to that.
Okay.
It looks like we got a thumbs up, maybe.
Okay, cool.
So I think we answered it.
Okay.
All right. So it looks like either I've answered by commenting on the questions in the Q&A, or you've answered all of our questions, and we're about out of time. We'll leave the Q&A open here for you guys to find your questions and make copies of anything. And hopefully that will, that's all I have on my side. Did you have anything, Gayleen?
No, but we appreciate you guys. Thank you for participating. Thank you for joining us. We hope that this was informative. Don't let this stuff beat you up, right? Go through your test mode. It'll build confidence and give you an opportunity to see, what's going on in your software. If you need to make changes, we can make changes. Not a problem. Or we can make corrections before we do our final form. So hope you guys found it very informative. We appreciate you.
Great, and don't forget that the presentation video and a PDF of the slides will be available out on the Community Hub. I've shared the link a couple times, and it probably will be available tomorrow. All right, everybody, thank you.
Bye, everybody.